Welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about two 7.62 caliber rifles of different lengths that have distinctly different uses, and yet were actually produced in the same era in the early 50s. Now this is the AK47, named for when it was first invented in 1947. The development of it started actually in 1946. But by the time it came to fruition and the wrinkles were ironed out, various things and everything, it was about the mid 50s that the Soviet Union began to deploy these to all the troops. And at the same time, of course, we have 7.62, but this is not the 7.62 by 39 like the AK-47 is, but this is the 7.62 NATO, or 7.62 by 51. That's the length of the cartridge case. Two entirely different concepts at work here. The U.S. military, or I should say the U.S. Ordnance Department, had been essentially still working with the notion of European flat theater combat, open country, as had been common in European theater in World War II. And actually some of the tactics were not much different than what they had been for 100 years prior. In other words, the idea of long-range shooting to take an enemy out, and also for fitting bayonets for close-in hand-to-hand combat with bayonets. So the idea of a heavy rifle that could sustain itself in basically the same sort of warfare that had been used in trench warfare in World War I, where heavy rifles were used for striking a combatant with a buttstock, and for thrusting with a bayonet on the front, long-range shooting out to extended ranges. I mean, realistically, you know, a competent marksman with this rifle, the range is almost unlimited. You know, if he wants to lob shots in at 1,000 yards, he certainly can do it, and he certainly can put down some very aggressive fire and very effective fire at those ranges. But as time had kind of gone, because tactics that were discovered by the Soviet Union, by Russia, against them in World War II, with rifles such as the Sturmgewehr 44, but even before that in 1941 and 42, they had sustained some losses where submachine guns used by the German forces were basically able to put down withering fire and flank them, and cause significant casualties and difficulties with their battle strategy. So early on in the beginning of what we would call the beginning of World War II, of course the Russians had already begun to fight World War II long before we arrived, but they began to rethink some of the concepts of battle engagement, and they started to think more in terms of tactical warfare. Tactical warfare meaning rather that, I mean, now that there's nobody shooting, I can take these earplugs out. Tactical fighting, in that fighting had become more of a thought process between two opposing football teams. In other words, who could get the jump on the other one better than the other, and using closer range tactics. The Russians certainly discovered when that type of fire was used against them, with full automatic fire was used against them by hordes of an enemy, by an enemy that was able to deploy each soldier with submachine guns, they basically didn't have time to reload and to engage them, and they could be overwhelmed basically like a swarm of bees. Literally, you had a swarm of bees coming over your head. You know, a soldier is able to sometimes, muster up a certain amount of courage and intestinal fortitude to get up out of his cover position and to move forward, knowing that he's got maybe an occasional round coming in his direction, and he can feel fairly confident that he's going to be able to survive that situation. It's a little bit different when you're facing a fusillade of bullets that's sustained and it's coming from many different weapons surrounding you. That can really cause some upset in terms of your ability to fight. So the Russians recognized that very early on, and they wanted to initially they wanted to equip more people with submachine guns such as the AK47, and some people would still be carrying the SKS rifle, and they'd have a squad automatic weapon, which was a heavier machine gun that was deployed in that situation. But that eventually devolved into having just the AK-47 for everybody, that everybody would be armed with the same very effective submachine gun. So they had come to that realization before the United States had. The United States recognized the need for a individual full automatic rifle, and that was the idea that they put into the M14, which is that the military version, naturally, of the M1A rifle made by the civilian Springfield Armory in Illinois. But it was not an effective strategy, simply because the 7.62 by 51 is simply not a round which lends itself well to full automatic fire out of a gun that weighs basically 10 pounds loaded, a little bit more than 10 pounds loaded. It's totally uncontrollable for most people. Even for those who have some control over it, it has very, very little effectiveness. And with a 20-round magazine, it didn't take very long to waste 20 shots. It was the military realized that it was a foregone conclusion that they were going to end up basically nailing down those selective fire switches. A lot of those selective fire switches had basically been decommissioned so that they couldn't be used. Then the next problem came when the United States found itself involved with the battle in Southeast Asia in Vietnam. There, the M14 really was found sorely wanting. This rifle here really, it is as wonderful and as beautiful a rifle as this is. To swing this around in close cover and to even carry this around in 105, 110 degree heat with 98% humidity, it caused significant issues with warping of the stock, swelling of the stock, cracking of the stock. It's extremely heavy, and it's certainly not something that could be swung around very, very easily in the thick Nipah environment of a jungle in Vietnam. It totally out of its habitat in that environment. This was a long-range rifle that had little to no usefulness in Vietnam, and that was soon recognized, and especially when it was coming up against the Chinese Communist AK-47. This particular one right here is it would be called a Type 56-2, Type 56 meaning the year 1956, and Type 2 meaning that it had a side folding stock. A Type 1, 56-1, had a underfolding stock. Now, it's a little bit difficult for me to do it without swinging the rifle around. This one here has a stamped receiver It's made by the same, it's made by a factory in China, which makes military firearms, full automatic AK-47s. This one here was a pre-banned model because it has the folding stock, which was banned. But this one here was made in 1987. It's a Polytech. It's considered to be, some people deride the fact that it has a stamped lower receiver. The receiver is stamped versus being milled. But in actuality, these give tremendously good service. They're virtually an indestructible rifle, and these have been standing the test of time for quite a number of decades, and nobody can really estimate how many AK-47s exist around the world, have been made. It's perhaps hundreds of millions. At the very least, the one count puts it at over 100 million, but there's many people that estimate that it could be hundreds of millions. And that owes to the fact that around 1956, Nikita Khrushchev, the premier of the Soviet Union, he decided that, of course, he wanted to bury the world, bury the free world, and he had made that announcement very, very clear at a UN summit, where he slapped his heel on the podium and he said that I will bury you, and he was talking about everybody in the free world. He took the notion that all the communist countries that would have a similar mindset should have that same rifle and have the same capability. Should all be provided with the resources, basically the plans and the know-how to build AK-47s. So there it went throughout all the Warsaw Pact, and basically this is a Warsaw hat I picked up in Warsaw, Poland, on a visit about 8 years ago with my wife. We were on a religious pilgrimage there. We had a great time. Warsaw is certainly not what it was during the Soviet occupation, and since the wall in Berlin came down. But that rifle has been an enormous success throughout the world. It has been supplanted by the Russians in 1997. I should say 1974. It was supplanted by the AK-74, which was again named after the year of its inception, which was a 22 bore using the same size cartridge case. And that case followed along some of the success that the 223, the 5.56 NATO had achieved. Basically, that a full automatic rifle did not need to have a large bore to be effective. That with a smaller bore, it made the carrying of ammo. It could increase the capacity significantly. A 55 grain bullet versus a 125 grain bullet, and of course there's other bullet loadings for the cartridge. But it all boils down to the fact that the more a person can carry a field, the more effective he is without having to be resupplied. And it comes down to the burden factor. Having to carry a full magazine that's loaded with 30 rounds of a round that weighs 3 times as much versus a 30-round magazine that there's a third of that weight. That's significantly a good achievement. But the 7.62 by 39 is a stellar achievement militarily, and it has proven itself. It's essentially a 300-yard cartridge. Nobody ever in the Soviet mindset, they realized that the opposing enemy is not killed largely at long range. The opposing enemy is the greatest threat is in close, and that's where tactical combat really comes into play. Shooting at close range. and being able to overwhelm at those close ranges. So that's what we got. I'm going to be shooting both of these. So let me put my hearing protection on. I can't believe I actually drove all the way out here to the range without my regular hearing protection. So I'm going to be using these earplugs, and hopefully I'm not too distressed by it. So let me get these in, reset the camera, and I'll start blazing away here. I'm just going to be shooting at some steel targets out there. Okay, got my glasses on. Load her up with 20 rounds. See how this goes. Well, as you can see, it's a very handy rifle, and shoots superbly offhand. I was able to hit that disc at 50 yards every single time without much difficulty. Let's see how it goes with the AK. Well, as you can see, recovery time is a little bit quicker, even in semi-automatic fire, and that was very controllable. There's no question whatsoever that the U.S. Army and the U.S. Marines found themselves greatly at disadvantage when they were faced with a group of people shooting at them with this in full automatic fire. This rifle was designed for full automatic fire, and with single shot fire being really something of a unusual necessity that might be deployed at times, but for the most part this rifle was entirely conceived around the idea of using it in full automatic fire. So that's it. You got two fine 7.62s. One, the 7.62 by 39, which is found throughout the world and in combat everywhere, and it still remains a significant threat. And you've got the 7.62 by 51, 7.62 NATO, which is again a very serious round, but certainly doesn't find the same comfort zone for modern tactical warfare. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Benny's doing great. I'm going to have him out bird hunt pretty soon. God bless.